So this is the first edition of the Tight Five, 5 questions with Dr. Jason Frishman, founder of the JourneyMen Foundation. How you doing, Jason?
Oh, I'm good. How are you doing, Matt? I'm
I'm
glad to
good.
doing this.
Thanks for doing it. So we have 5 questions. I sent them to you in advance, but I'm going to read them to you fresh as we're chatting. You've been
Excellent.
involved in mental health for a number of years, but you're also a professional chef. How do these two passions complement each other?
It was funny when I told you that I didn't prepare in terms of reading. I just looked at them, and this question made me smile because first thing is just for anybody who listens to this, we're not going to call me a chef because of, I don't have the credentials for that. So I'm a cook and I've done it professionally. I do it at home. I do it whenever, but I'm not a chef.
Professional cook.
As
That's fine.
yes, as you know, words are important, and so I just wanted to throw that out there. But they are incredibly, I have found over the years, they're incredibly complementary. I mean, this all started decades ago when I was working as a therapist in Boston. And I was working full-time as a therapist in Boston, and anyone who works as a therapist knows full-time is more than 40 hours. And I was also working part-time at a newly opened restaurant in Harvard Square. And so that part-time turned into about 35 hours a week. And it was, frankly, so I was working, whatever it was, 70-hour weeks or whatever it was. And it was some of the happiest times that I've had because the work was a great balance for my own brain and mindset. And like, one was more physical, one was more mental. The one that was physical was also sort of mental, the one,
Yeah.
and so it became, for me personally, a wonderful thing. But when you boil it down, for me, a lot of what I do has been, it involves nourishing people and helping people learn how to nourish themselves. And so whether it's me cooking for people, or what I do more these days in the food world is about education and teaching and doing classes around work cooking, and offering small kind of gatherings, whether it's in cooking like that or in my therapeutic or coaching world. It's really about how do we fill ourselves up, and how do we really create presence in the moment. So if we're having a meal, we're cooking the meal, we're not doing 80 million things all at once. We're really present to that. We're aware of all the things that are connected. And that actually, as I say that, that's another really important connection, is the type of therapy and mental health and coaching that I do involves an awareness and a deconstruction of all of the other systems that surround the individual. So it's not just, traditional therapy locates the problem within the person. And I
Right.
really, I don't accept that notion. And so, so much about mental health is about, systems of oppression, racism, sexism, all of these different, financial capital, all of these sort of structural systems that impact our interpersonal relationships and our mental health. When it comes to food, we also have to think about, where the food came from and how it, how it's processed, and what, is it good for you on what level and how many levels, and all of those things, and do we spend time being aware of those things. And so the greater context in both the food world and our mental health world is a really, to me, it's a fascinating puzzle. And so, and there are no right answers, right? So we get a chance to play with that on both sides.
Now, full disclosure, we've talked about this concept a bunch over the years.
Yeah.
One thing that would just occurred to me for the first time as we were talking about is I can see preparing a meal as simple as just, breakfast sandwiches for your boys, or maybe something more ornate, like a meal for like 10 people. You're both you're in control, versus in a therapeutic session where you're kind of listening proactively, but there's a passiveness to that. But also,
Mm-hmm.
you're not solving a problem when you're making a meal. You're kind of creating a solution from like just, ingredients and from scratch, literally.
Yeah, absolutely. And it, in at least in the way that I like to cook, when it, my best experiences of cooking, even if I'm the one in charge and I'm cooking, it is a collaborative, co-constructed process, right? I need to
Mm.
know, especially up here in Vermont, I need to know what are the dietary choices, and who's gluten-free or grain-free or egg-free or vegan-free or nut-free, or like
Yeah.
all of the different things. And my philosophy in cooking is I don't want anyone to feel deprived, so I make sure that we create things for everyone. And it's not like, "Ooh, I made this great thing, and
Mm.
you vegan, I made you, here's a slab of tofu," right? Like,
Here's some
I make
nuts.
tofu from
Here's some
scratch,
nuts
so
and
it's
some
going to be
rocks.
good.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
make great tofu.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm making it from scratch. I love tofu, but I'm not going to just like plop it on the table. I'm going to make it so everybody can enjoy everything that's going on, and there's choices and there. But you're right. It's this idea of, the playing with passivity or activity or activeness, and then solution focused or just listening, or these kinds of things. There's a lot of intercorrelations between the two things for sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So, you launched the JourneyMen Foundation last fall. How did that come about?
Well, it's it was actually a long journey, and it makes sense, to me who had to live it. But I have worked for years in, I say almost 25 years in the therapy office, in different residentials and things like that, and almost entirely with men and boys and families. And then as I had my own kids, I wound up having less and less kid clients, because I wanted to sort of save the child energy for my kids
Yeah.
and our friends' kids. Started seeing more and more adults, focused more on fathers, because in some ways it's kind of who was referred, but it was also whom I loved working with. And then I realized, like, so much of the traditional psychotherapy world, the rules and the boundaries and all the regulations, many of them are wonderful, but many of them are really restrictive and not the most useful for men who, often need a community. One story I think about a lot is, I was sitting with, this is back before the pandemic, and I'm sitting with a client and in my office, and I know that the guy who's literally waiting on the other side of my door in my waiting room, if I could introduce the two guys,
Yeah.
they probably would have significantly less need of me, but I'm not allowed to do that.
Mm.
Like, I'm, like, and I get why. I do understand that, but it was frustrating. And then, very soon thereafter, I had this realization that, no matter how powerful of a session I have with a guy in my therapy office, as soon as he walks out of my room and into culture that isn't, as a whole, typically accepting of men doing this kind of work, right? Portion of our progress, the moment he walks out of the door, is gone, because he's got to leave it at the door in order to go back and be a part of the world, right? Like, to go and be part of his business world, or to go and be a part of his buddies, or to go and be a part of his, even his relationship at home. He's got to, like, hold up certain masks or hold up certain things that, even if he's ready to let go of them, the community and the culture is not. And so Journeyman was really born out of saying, I want to provide something that, as a therapist of 25 years, I know would be useful and helpful and supportive to men, that's different than, "I'm broken, I got to go see a shrink,"
Yeah.
you know?
So, you've talked a little bit about the inspiration, the motivation, but kind of, I know there's a very well thought out curriculum behind the Journeyman. There's a number of chapters. Um, choose your own adventure, if you will. Could you talk a
Exactly,
bit
literally.
about, like, the inspiration, or the motivation behind that curriculum that kind of is at the heart of the Journeyman journey?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, I mean, I'm going to watch you on video turn a little red, because my ability to talk about it now has a lot to do with our conversations over the last 6 months or so.
Right.
Because, like, to be able to say it succinctly was really important. And so I'm going to now not probably say it succinctly, but I can actually say it, nice, but basically Journeyman, is the idea behind it is, my background is in something called adventure therapy and something called narrative therapy. So I'm an adventure storyteller or a storytelling adventurer, however you want to say it. And so I love and have always loved stories of adventure and journeys and fantasy and all of that, and have seen the concept of adventure and journey as a metaphor for life on so many levels. And so for decades, that concept was the underpinning of the therapy that I did. And it was very much from this point of view of something called the hero's journey, right? Joseph Campbell,
Mhm.
Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, the whole idea about the journey, the hero going off and battling dragons and getting treasure and saving the universe. The problem was that it's really only half the story, and because this story has become prolific and it's everywhere in culture, it's actually, I think, quite damaging to men and boys, because it only gives, the main model we have, the main cultural story we have is, in order to be worth things, you got to be epic and legendary and do
Mhm.
amazing grand things. And even if you're going to do those things, the story doesn't involve any of the training that's required in order to do those things. And so there's this false sense of like, I'm going to get called, I'm going to be the chosen one, and all of a sudden I'm going to be powerful, I'm going to do great things, and then everyone's going to love me. Now, right, that's obviously oversimplifying, but my whole thing about this was, and particularly after having my own sons, was I'm not doing epic things anymore. I'm doing great things, right? I love being a dad, I love doing these things, but I'm not necessarily like I'm not going off on grand adventures. I'm staying home and like wiping butts and washing, dishes, and like.
There's no
And
lightsaber
so,
involved here.
right, exactly, like I wish there was the force, because I, maybe wipe their own, but but so Journeyman was really born out of the idea that everyday life is magical and adventurous, and we've lost touch of that. And I think in many ways it has a lot to do, well, we can get into a lot of this, but sort of the social structure of things, patriarchy, all of the different things have limited the expression and the possibilities for men to develop. And so journeyman became this idea of inviting men to sort of come in to an inn, right? Metaphorically, a virtual inn,
Mhm.
and let their shoulders down and be heard, and like, get some training as to what to do, and also share stories and elevate the mundane, right? Like
Mhm.
elevate the importance of our everyday lives to meaning making and values, right? Like, if I'm going to be changing diapers and wiping butts, is that meaningful? Like, is there a way to make that a values based activity? Because I chose to have this kid, at least, I did. I chose to have my kids. And, like, these are the kids, these are the humans who I like purport to love more than anybody else. If I see it as a chore, I'm shortchanging everyone. And so this idea that men, I'm toying with an article. I'm going to ask you about it, another time, but I'm toying with an article where the title is going to be "A Man's Place is in the Home."
Mhm.
you know, and not that it's our only places there, but the idea that, like, all right, in my home are the people I say I care the most about. How can I be more present and connected to them? And my belief that is these foundational adventures, right, are the answer to the one-sidedness of the hero's journey. Right. So we build foundational adventures, which give us the training, knowledge, awareness, presence, and mindfulness to be able to both do the important things in our home, but also to go out into the world and do things in our community, at our work, and like to be leaders in better,
Right.
more powerful ways. And so, um, I think for a long time I played with the hashtag Joseph Campbell was wrong. um, and I love the story. I mean, I love the hero's journey, but I think there needs to be an answer to it. There needs to be an other half of the adventure that we talk about more. So Journeyman is offering that. We're offering a curriculum based on my many years of working with men, plus the research and I certainly didn't make it all up all myself. There's lots of other, work coming from the narrative therapy world, the adventure therapy world that I've drawn from. But it's a curriculum that allows men to really slow down, understand what's most important to them, and follow a path of their own choosing that allows them to gain the presence, the connection, the skills to be that father that they want to be to their kids, that partner they want to be to their partner, and for themselves. Like, so many men are not like, I'm not where I want to be. I'm not doing what I want to be. I get up
Yeah.
everything, you know.
I was gonna
Yeah,
say, like, as you, and I've heard you describe, we've worked on it a little bit, obviously.
yeah.
There's an aspect of getting into, the when your children are, grown up, if you will, somewhere in the vicinity of 8 to 14. You're
Mhm.
kind of like, but you as an individual, whether it be professionally and otherwise, you're in your 40s or 50s, and you're like, oh, I'm not going to be the hero. I'm not going to be the super duper action star, lead baseball
Yeah,
player, saver of everything. Oh,
yeah.
well, and so almost I can see, like, but there's amazing work and foundations that all of these men have built over the years that really is something to be proud of versus saving the day.
Right, 100%. And that's exactly right. Like, we have to be able to say, like, just being a like, you've heard me say this, but being a connected present father is social activism,
Yeah.
and what an amazing way to frame it, because the more we have that foundational skill, the more we can also then look outward. I have so many guys who are like, yeah, of course I care about this and this and this, but I don't have the
Yeah.
time or resources to do it. Well, okay, you know you're doing it if you make the chance to know yourself, to know your kids, to know, and
Yeah.
what a gift you're giving the little ones, for sure.
So to that, to that end, being an active and connected and present father, a lot of us over the last 3 or 4 years have had a chance to do that as the world shut down with COVID.
Yeah,
What are some of the impacts you're seeing in the communities that you work with, whether it be some of the journeymen or as well as your private practice? What are some of the things you're seeing
yeah.
kind of happening?
I was actually talking about it this morning a little bit. Across the board, both in my practice and with my journeyman clients, and actually talking to colleagues as well, there's an increase in anxiety. There's an increase in sort of or a decrease in frustration tolerance, and dysthymic, which is sort of little depression, small, and we were talking about it. We're just sort of saying, like, this is a really good example, because traditional psychology has always placed these things solidly in our own brain,
Hmm.
right? Like, anxious, depression, it's a neurological, chemical imbalance, blah blah blah. There might be a modicum of truth to that, but right here we have a great example where the world is literally burning and people are anxious about it. We're not going to say that all of a sudden their brains have broken more, right? Like,
All right.
there is external circumstances. And so, yeah, to your question, I think that there is an increased isolation. you
Hmm.
know um I would say what's interesting, specifically about men and fathers, an impact that I haven't actually talked much about, I'm just even thinking aloud right now, is it may not be increased isolation, but there's an increased awareness of one's
Mm.
isolation, right? Like, when you're off going to work and you're like, you know kind of doing an after work thing, you're going to the bar with the buds, or what, going to play, a pickup game or whatever, you can pretend that you're not isolated.
Hmm.
But when you're staying, but you are equally isolated, because you're not having real meaningful connections with people, and you're not, you're just sort of going the motions. And but I think, this has put it in our faces that, like, oh, shoot, as guys, as too many guys have said in my office, if my wife left me, I'd have no one really to tell.
Mm.
Right. So the awareness of that, I think, is stronger for a lot of the men that I'm working with, who then, you know, will say, like, oh man, like, now I feel like I know this, but now I can't do anything about it. Right. Like, there's this awareness that even, like, male friendships are,
Yeah.
there are memes and jokes about male friendships, right? There are not, you know, like, negative jokes about women becoming friends and hanging out,
No.
right?
No.
But, like, the fact that in our culture there's a genre of movies about bromances, which is sort of inherently, like, grounded in homophobia and patriarchal
Yeah.
thought,
Yeah.
is like how much harder is it then for men who are especially older and not at like in the office or whatever to make and have friends and like meaningful connections. So I think that's been the awareness. I don't know if I'm giving you three, but I think that's really the big one that jumps out is really there's an awareness of isolation, loneliness, separateness, disconnection that I think men who may have always had it been an impact on them are now feeling it in ways that are new, and they feel shitty about it, you know?
To circle back a little bit, almost as if we intended it. You get to that point, and now what do you do?
Yeah,
I've broken down all of this structure, which was kind of impeding me from living not the perfect life, but your best life, and really living it and being present in it. Now, now that you've broken some of those things down, now how do you kind of find the things that you need within this new construct? You know?
exactly. Well, I would actually say there's another step in there. Not just how do you find the things you need, but how do you figure what you need? Because
Yeah.
I'm saying there's an increased awareness of things being not right,
Hmm.
but the solution is not even as because we don't have stories for it. We don't have teaching stories of how
Yeah.
like there are still men who will say, okay, I get that I'm isolated, so I'll just fix it.
Yeah. But no,
I'll just work harder.
as a friend of ours often said, you got to do the work now.
Yeah, yeah,
That's what
yeah,
happens.
exactly. And doing the work is can be vague until it's not. My
Yeah.
other friend who I've introduced you to will always say it's not a thing until it's a thing, right? So
Right.
we have to decide what the thing is first and do it. And so yeah, to be honest, that's what Journeyman's about,
Mhm.
right? Journeyman is really about creating this space for guys, like I said, let their shoulders down,
Right.
you know, and be in a place where they can explore this stuff.
Speaking of exploring,
Yes.
what book, author, or thinker has been a touchstone for you throughout your career? It can be professional, it can be personal, it can be both. It can be
For me,
fantastic.
it's always both. Yeah, for me, it's always both. I I'm the dork that always reads, and it's like I'll find connections with either science fiction or textbooks. So, um, I can't give you one because it's just impossible. But I
I
will
knew it
talk
was
about.
impossible. I knew that.
Yeah, yeah, of
That's why
course.
I gave
I
you
will
three
say
options.
yeah, so I will say, for one, Joseph Campbell has certainly been a major impact on all of my thinking from high school on. I mean, I've been reading his work forever, and so with him, you'd include people who wrote following him in his tradition. So, like, but I would say starting with Joseph Campbell, this idea of the hero's journey, and he has a book, Myths to Live By. I mean, he was really impactful on Star Wars, which is I'm a big fan of. And the ideas behind that are what got me to a place where I'm now saying Joseph Campbell was wrong, right?
Right.
Like that element was is
There's
is
a
is
father joke in
powerful.
here someplace.
They're awesome. Yes, of course. Well, and at some point we could talk about the incredibly deep reason why dad jokes are so important, but we'll get to that
And
some other time.
that's a whole other thing. Yeah.
So Joseph Campbell, I think that was a big one for me. Professionally, the writing of two men, Michael White and David Epstein, they are really seen as sort of some of the founders of the narrative therapy world.
Mm.
There are lots of people who are right about the narrative perspective in other fields, but in the therapeutic world, the two of them have a number of books, and I came into them early on, like even before I was in my doctoral program. I was in a master's and read even some of it in undergrad and went to many of their trainings in person. Michael White used to call me the adventure guy, like that. So his stuff, which was amazing because so much of narrative therapy is born from a very different well.
Right.
It's pulled from a very different well than many other therapeutic perspectives. And so it's from philosophy, it's from literary theory, it's all these things. And so it was fascinating for me and connected all of these things that I love. I'm a big nonfiction read or fiction reader. I'm all these things, and all of a sudden all of it's relevant, you know.
Yeah.
So Joseph Campbell, which was this sort of hero's journey thing, and then Michael White and David Epstein, who taught me to question some of these taken for granted stories, which then led me to questioning the hero's journey. And then the last one, or not the last one, but the thing that I would say, it's you'll find it funny because it does circle us back, is a chef. He's a guy named Hugh Fernley Whittenstall. I'll give you one guess what country he's from. It's like the most typical name from this country.
I'd have to guess England.
Yep.
Of course. Yeah.
Hugh Fernley Whittenstall. And he was a chef in London, and then I think he was fired or he left because he just wasn't like fast or clean enough for the restaurant business. And so he went on this crazy adventure where he went to like a rural town, Dorset in England, and like rented a cabin and became in the States we call it a homesteader. In England they call it a smallholder. And he created a TV series about it. And it's all about him learning to garden and take care of livestock and make a living with it, and then but all with like beautiful, really amazing cooking and like everything from scratch. And so his philosophy around cooking is very similar to mine, or rather I'd say mine is to him, and he's been in many ways kind of a hero to me. And it's grown to the point where he then was able to buy a big plot of land, and now there's the river, his the show and the place that he was smallholding is called River Cottage. And he then has a River Cottage cooking school, and it's grown into this massive thing. And it's all about using things seasonally, using things like if I had basically, me, if I had taken food in the direction of a career, I'd want it to be that. And as connected as that is to the way that I see JourneyMen and whatever, his cookbooks, if I am having a hard time emotionally, I pull up one of his old shows and just watch it as a way of like getting grounded, So, and he did things where he single-handedly changed the eating patterns in his town and in many places in England by going on like, food advocacy things. We don't have time for it, but I can tell you a little, like he changed the purchasing practices in chicken for like several towns, in terms of going for more humanely raised as opposed to factory farmed, and why. And it's amazing what he's done. And so he's someone who got the foundation, did those things, and then went out and started doing activism. Yeah. So he's really someone who I humorously, when I've done some local presentations and workshops and classes, I've sent him an invite, like knowing he's coming from London, but I was like, hey, you might like this thing I'm doing.
Well, maybe someday, like, whether it be Dorset or Sussex or Essex, we'll be talking about the opening of the second JourneyMen's Tavern.
That's what I'm hoping. Yes,
we'll invite him to that opening.
Oh yes, I will certainly there. But anyway, yes.
Appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely.
Talk to you soon.
Wonderful, Matt. Thank you. This is a great conversation.
Cheers.
Later, man.